Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Midnight Gospel. This is, I guess, Pendleton Ward's big comeback to animation after we all kind of assumed he was not maybe ever going to make anything again. He comes back with this trippy, strange, weird, existential, philosophical animation show. And it's the kind of show that a creator or a filmmaker or an animator or probably all those things in his case are able to use their clout to make an interesting weird project that they probably couldn't have pitched before they had a great success that someone would be willing to kind of do that sort of thing with. And that's really very much what The Midnight Gospel is, and it's amazing at that. I love the idea of taking this audio, which is from Duncan Trussell's podcast called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Takes some of it from that, some of this recorded directly for this, and animates sort of over it. And I think this uses that in such a way that it gives you kind of greater ideas that they're just kind of speaking about and kind of animates them in an interesting way, kind of like breaks your synapses and makes you even more imaginative. For someone like Pendleton Ward, who previously created probably one of the greatest shows of the 2010s, if not the greatest show of the 2010s, and definitely the best animated show of the 2010s. You don't need to at me because it's the truth. I can tell he loves animation because one of the big things of animation, and I've said it a million times, and Tiny Toon Adventures said it, I guess, anything is possible in animation. And it does that, but it does that very much. But when people talk about the advent of MTV and how people wouldn't just listen to a record and look into the skies and imagine anymore, which is bullshit. You can still do that, and you can still watch a music video and imagine as well. This does that to such a degree where I'm taking in everything that's going on. There's so much beautiful animation going on at once. I can barely take in everything. There's so much happening. When at the same time there's these interesting conversations, it's almost like an intellectual delight for the eyes and ears that I really didn't expect. I guess I sort of have an interesting relationship with this show. Obviously this is way after it came out, but I would just like watch an episode kind of in bed and it would sort of relax me in a lot of ways. It would get me ready for bed. It would make me feel sort of good. I used to, work at sort of an art school. There's a bunch of art teachers who I would just talk to, and we talk about life and sort of philosophy and art and movies and things like that. And it sort of took me back to that. It also, it just so wonderful in what it's doing. I really love this kind of thing. Sure, it's definitely something I would have watched and gotten stoned to in college, but there's so much more there. It's such a complex show, but in some ways all of it is laying out there on the surface, but in other ways it's not. Now, if you hated kind of the more surreal nature that Adventure Time took, I don't think this is the show for you. But if you're willing to listen to its kind of intellectual discourse or philosophical discourse and so forth, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with every guest he has on, I don't know if they're the most interesting or enlightening person, but we don't really get that anymore. Sure, there were times where we'd have great thinkers and writers on talk shows, and they would talk about these bigger existential issues. They actually would, not like every day, but it would happen occasionally. Now that doesn't happen, and having any sort of thing like that currently is an amazement in itself. But bringing that to animation as well is kind of like pushing all these things into a wholly new, different dimension than we could have ever imagined it could possibly be. Now, this obviously kind of takes the format that we've seen a lot of different shows and shorts and so forth do, where you take audio, pre-existing audio of someone just talking, and animate over it. Obviously, that has been going on for a very long time. You can see it from Dr. Katz. I can think of examples that go back until the 1960s, but obviously, I also worked on a cartoon like that, which was Knack Force. As well as, I know Ian worked on not just Adventure Time, but a show called Animation Pals with Pendleton Ward. You can check out that channel. It's on YouTube right now, and then worked on this. I'm not saying I deserve absolutely any credit, and I definitely don't think this way past what Knack Force even was. To such a degree, I don't think we should really even be mentioned in the same breath. But I didn't really realize, actually, when I watched the first episode, how the similarities, I guess. So I was a little taken aback, even though apparently a lot of people did know that before. I just didn't think of it. I've always liked this format. I'm going to say that. And I think it's really wonderful. I'd always heard Pendleton word like knock force. I don't know. I've never met him. I guess tangentially, I'm sort of in an artistic influency sort of strange way, maybe. I like what it does with this, and I think it pushes it into such an interesting way. If you look at the last episode in particular with audio of his mother from 2013, she would die 3 weeks later. That is probably one of the greatest pieces of animation I've seen this year, and maybe one of the greatest pieces of filmmaking I've seen this year. It was insanely moving. It was extremely meaningful. It's probably the best of what this show has to offer and what this format has to offer at highlighting the beautifulness of doing this sort of thing, of playing with it, but also highlighting things while also having bigger meetings of how large and how crazy this thing sort of thing is. And I do think there's a thing animation likes to do. If you look at Inside Out or the final episode, which, because I guess I'm just reviewing the first season since that's the only thing out right now, called Mouse of Silver, does that as well, where you kind of take the internal, much like Inside Out, and make it this huge external explosion, blockbustery type of thing. But this takes it into so much more surreal way. Certainly I could say there are certain shots of that actually did remind me of Heavy Metal, even though bringing that up it seems kind of pedestrian. But that episode was very moving and very shocking how beautiful it was. And I didn't know that when I was listening to someone who had died 7 years before, which is shocking. But it's beautiful that she's able to live on in a way that in 2020 her words are able to mean something to people, and she was able to, through her son and through this animation, say so much more to so many people. Is a sort of romantic way to think of art, and the way they think of it, or the way he thinks of it, is his mother's not really gone. She's a part of him. She's a part of his DNA. You get that because she's a part of, his big animated show. She's a part of this episode that's continued to live on a streaming service that wasn't what it was in 2013. That this world is what it is, and her words are able to continue. Now, I'm not going to say every one of these people are great, but I would say that episode, you get more and more used to the format. I don't think there's much continuity for someone who's very literal, who understands things at face value. This is, in some ways it is. I think it would be an easy gateway, but maybe it's too much, because I loved it for everything it was going into. I loved going into these weird images, these side things. Like the first episode with Dr. Drew, they went into all these George Romero references where they're talking about mental health and everything, and it kind of made me feel more comfortable. I don't really talk about those sort of things, and it made me more comfortable thinking about those sort of things. And I found the show to be really moving, very articulate, and sort of inspiring into everything it could really do with it. I don't know if I could really go into the whole idea of every episode necessarily, and I don't even remember the names of the people in most of them. I just remember, talking about like embalming people and the whole industry within that, talking about, being comfortable with death. The idea of life and death and the philosophical meaning and meditation, everything is all throughout this show, and it kind of turned me on to a lot of those things that I hadn't really thought as much about, or what this show says about our world and the ideas within our brain, while also being this trippy, weird animated show. It's like, I get it came out on 420, obviously they're doing that kind of audience, but I almost don't want to disrespect it that much. I want to say this is so much more than just that. This is so beautiful and rich tapestry of this whole show, and just saying it's this trippy weird show is just sacrificing it for virtually no reason. There's so much beauty and amazing things going on in this, and I just really love the Midnight Galaxy for that. I almost felt precious about it. It's not a bingey show, and I didn't binge it. It took me forever to watch it because I really wanted to hang on to every episode and think about it, and I had such an interesting relationship with this show. But I think that's one of the things I like about where animation is at this point, is you are able to do those things. You're able to push the medium forward. You're able to do so much more with it because the money is letting you. And maybe, I don't know if this is the future of animation. I don't know what Pendleton Ward will be up to next, but having, another kind of weird, funky, kind of Adventure Timey type show, or Bravest Warriors or whatever, that's fine. But this feels like kind of the next level for him that feels so much more natural. This feels like the real artistic follow-up in a way that feels just amazingly inspiring and makes you feel like his possibilities with animation aren't something that we're used to and are used to having mapped out. And just as he's taken a format that I myself felt like we did interesting things with, and he's pushed it far beyond that in such a non-literal way, while also being very literal, while also being philosophical, pushing it to the nth of what animation could do with a certain thing. And I really like it, and I'll probably watch it again. I'm definitely going to watch the last episode again, and I'm just happy with the whole experience of it. I think it's just a show I just sort of fell in love with immediately, and first I was I was surprised. It was like, I didn't know this was so much like similar to something I had done in terms of the format, not in terms of everything it accomplishes, obviously. After the first one, I didn't really think about it. I just thought of how wonderful it was, and how beautiful it was, and just how fun it was to dive right into that. And much like a great heavy metal magazine issue, but in kind of not the sexist, creepy, strange way that people think of that, kind of like the philosophical, weird, strange science fiction, I'm on a hill thinking about life kind of way, and having an amazing conversation with someone. The Midnight Gospel is that kind of a very amazing, rich conversation wrapped into some really interesting, bizarre, trippy animation. Makes, for me, an amazing recipe that just hits me in all the right places and makes me feel like the whole day and everything that's going on is almost even more worth it, just to sort of experience this kind of rich show. And maybe that's why I like to just fall asleep to it, because it made me feel like, all is right in the world, that something like this fucking show can actually exist. So if you've seen The Midnight Gospel and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.